Welcome to the Collidescope podcast. It's your host, George Salis. Today, I'll be reading one of my favorite stories from one of my favorite collections, The Hungry Girls by Patricia Eakins, which was reprinted in 2019 by Tough Poets Press for its 30th anniversary. The book is like a bestiary come to life. Think of Borges's The Book of Imaginary Beings, except rather than being encyclopedic, each entry is a story about a being born from Patricia's fertile imagination. In a world where we often forget our own animality, our connection with nature, Patricia's stories remain entirely relevant, reminding us not only that we are simply hairless primates, but that we are also on this world with creatures who share our very DNA. In a way, The Hungry Girls allows us to rekindle an awe for our fellow animals that might have gotten squandered since our youth. There's plenty more to unpack with each story, each gem of a tale, and I trust you'll agree when you hear the one I've chosen for you. So, put on your parka, think warm thoughts, and without further ado, let's get to the story. Oono by Patricia Eakins. Oono are the largest creatures on Earth, huge blobs of flesh suspended on flippers. The north ice creaks and groans beneath them. They slide into water gently as oil, and miles away the water rises. Tidal waves and hurricanes crash in the tropics, all because an Oono slid off the ice cap to fish. Oono cruise the depths, opening and closing their mouths. They swallow schools of fingerfish, whole seals, and even small whales. They only come up for air, rising to the top slowly, sometimes breaking ice with their heads. The cracks may resound for miles. A crack may even split the sky, making lightning flash. The ignook people hear the crack and see the flash. They say to each other, "The world lives." Except for tusks that hang from the back of the upper jaw, and Oono's mouth has no teeth. He opens and closes a sieve, yet teeth guard the tunnel-like doors of the females' bodies. The males are afraid to enter the womb, so when a male smells a female in heat, he sends for a child who is already born. "The doors of my wife have reddened," he says. He drops his seed in a fold of his child's neck. The child flops across the ice to the mother, who has rolled on her back. The child climbs on her belly. He waddles to the birth door. He parts its lips with his nose and crawls past the teeth to the shelves where unborn children sleep. He places seeds on their tongues and crawls in beside them to nap. Each tooth contains a spirit, a small, fierce, white spirit, like a mean dog. Long before the tongues of the children tasted the seeds of their fathers, the children's ears were licked by the dogs, whispering their secret names. The dogs know when a young male has grown to maturity. He forgets the names of the dogs and gives off a different smell. The grown male smells like burning whale fat. There clings to him no longer the smell of fur between the toes of a sleeping bear, nor does the child's smell cling to the grown female. She smells like the insides of fresh-killed fishes' heads. When the doors of her body are red, she smells like the marrow of caribou thigh bones. Her round eyes widen, her round nose twitches. Then the howl of her toothed dogs shivers the wind like the keening that follows the dead across the ice. Before Oono had young, they could not mate at all. In those days there were but two Oono, a male named Enmaimai and his wife Enmainalu. They knew each other only by sight, for they lived far apart on the ice. Sun had given Enmainalu the toothed dogs. He told her Enmaimai could only enter her body if she told him the names of the dogs. But this, said Sun, she must do, though she would weaken and wither, slow and die when her children were born. She could choose the time and place of Enmaimai's entry, said Sun, but she could not refuse him entry. She could not choose to live forever because Sun would tire of seeing her sprawled on the ice. She must bear young, then die. Enmainalu wanted to live forever, so she vowed to trick Sun. She vowed she would never tell Enmaimai how to get past the dogs. She sent her spirit across the ice to warn him. She didn't care how long her children slept inside her. To wake them was to fall towards sleep herself. The more children walked from her shelves, the less of her there would be. She had not yet gotten tired of being. Enmaimai had, but he was afraid of the toothed dogs. They were not the death he had in mind. Enmaimai would die by melting into snow. That he had decided. But meanwhile he would rest. Because Enmainalu would not receive him, he rolled over on the ice. He turned his back. Then Enmainalu rolled over. She turned her back. Without looking at each other, the Oono sprawled on the ice and slid off it to fish. The spirits of their hearts moved in and out of their bodies. Heart spirits are not like toothed dog spirits. They are mischievous and powerful, but never mean. And Oono's heart spirit is blue. It walks on water and sails on ice, naming and renaming different kinds of white, like Uninak, fresh snowfall white, and Niniya, thin ice over water white. The spirit dives to the bottom of the sea and blows big bubbles to tip kayaks. It disappears by breathing out, then reappears by breathing in. Sometimes it burrows deep into ice and hides while its huge body waits on top. Only when the spirit is hungry does it return to the stiff, fat body. If Oono heart spirits did not need their bodies to eat, they might never return to them, but that is another story. Once an ignook trapped Enmaimai's spirit and imprisoned it in his body. This ignook, the hunter Ein, grieved with his wife, Nuni, because their 3 children had all been born too soon. They had died before taking their first milk. Each time a child died, Nuni covered her face with her hair, and each time a child died, Ein took its tiny body to the place where the old and sick go to turn their backs. Each time he himself carved a death knife. He widened the path in the left nostril so the child's spirit could walk across the ice where the eyes of the dead burned through the night in their villages. Then he threw the knife in the sea to be a shark. In those days, the living did not build villages. There was not enough food, and the families of hunters lived far apart. That is why the wise, older women could not get to Nooni in time to help with birth. The children died as Ein, with his hunter's hands, pulled them from her womb. Only the dead lived in villages then, the dead who do not have to eat. Even in the earliest days, the dead had left their stomachs behind. All they had kept of their bodies was their eyes, burning like hearth fires, the napes of their necks, and their hair and nails, which keep on growing forever. Even today, the dead weave their hairs together into houses without doors, with walls so tangled no one living, body or spirit, can penetrate. The dead can leave their houses at will, but do not leave often. They pull hairs from the walls to make nests. They huddle in the nests, telling secrets. They will not let the living hear them, but Nooni once tricked them. She had disguised her spirit as a gull, and had flown over the edge of the world. She listened outside a dead house for words that would permit her to carry her children back to life. But that is another story. When the spirit of a dead infant arrives at a hare house village, the dead themselves mourn. For though they are happy in their nests, they remember how they loved to live before their bodies wore out. They remember the pleasure of yawning after eating, how sunlight could feel on the tops of their heads. They remember rubbing noses and scratching each other's backs. They remember the sound of water humming under ice, the smells of food, the taste of tears. They tell the dead infant stories of what he missed in life. Because they no longer have any tears to let fall, they drop their finger and toenails into the water to sink to the bottom and turn into fish which have no eyes but see in the dark. These fish can swim right up to a death-knife shark and steal its food. But that is another story too. When Ein returned from carrying his third child to the death place, his wife uncovered her face and cooked him a stew of seal fat and fish. She cried into the pot, and the stew was salty. Ein knew the salt taste was tears. He was loth to smack his lips at his wife's sorrow. He rubbed his nose against hers, and she rubbed back. He knew she was keeping her grief to herself so she would not pain him. When she thought he slept, she covered her face with the tent of her hair and wept some more. Ein did not open his eyes, for he wished to respect her sorrow, but cupped his hands around her hip bones. Ah, if ignook could live in villages, it would not be Ein's clumsy hands that pulled the babies from Nooni so forcefully he frightened them to death. Men were not meant to pull babies from their wives. Men were meant to get food. But how could Ein do this when all the fish and even the seals hid beneath the closing ice, the coldest, hungriest parts of the year? The body of Enmaimai or Enmainalu would have fed all the ignook for many winters, but it was impossible to kill an Oono. Ein could not get close enough to throw the harpoon. The Oono's breath was colder than the coldest wind, colder than ice itself. Ein would have frozen in its blast. Even a bear that walked far out on the ice was easier to hunt than an Oono. One stormy day, Ein was sitting in his ice block house, carving fish, seals, and bears on a walrus tusk. He was working on the shaft of a new harpoon. On it he was carving every animal he hunted. As he worked, he chanted, "Oh, let my harpoons fly straight and true, straight and true, straight and true to the heart." The flame in the oil lamp flickered as he carved. "Noonie," he said, "you mustn't make the air shake with careless breathing. When the air shakes, the light shakes. When the light shakes, my hand shakes. The harpoon I'm carving will waver on its course." Noonie said she would breathe more carefully. She sat with her back to the lamp, but the flame still flickered. "The wind is seeping through the chinks in our house," said Ein. "I'll stop the chinks with spit," said Noonie. And she did, but still the lamp flickered. Ein looked all around the house. What was shaking the light? What was shaking his hand? Skins and furs, spears and tools and sledge dog harnesses. Everything was as it always was. Then Ein noticed a blue light shining from the center of one of the ice blocks. He poked Noonie in the ribs. "And my heart spirit has tunneled under the ice fields and up into our house," said Ein. "He's looking over my shoulder as I carve and making my hand shake." "What does the spirit come for?" asked Noonie. "It must want something." "I'll send my own heart spirit to talk," said Ein. "Be careful," said Noonie. "My grandmother lost herself that way. She sent her spirit out disguised as a dog. When it returned, she walked on 4 feet instead of 2, and snarled at her husband. She always took more than her share of meat, and she howled with the dogs at the moon." "I know what to do," said I. "I'm not so old my brains have turned to air." He pasted a gull's feather on his forehead with wax from Noonie's right ear, and rubbed his feet, hands, and face with dried gull's blood. Gulls shriek and chatter so. To this day, Oono loathes the fuss they make. Ein ate 14 gulls' eyes Noonie had preserved in walrus fat. Then he turned around, pulling on his left nostril and humming, "Na, na, na." His spirit flew from his left nostril. Ein's body lay as dead then on the floor of the ice house. Noonie covered it with fur robes, then crawled under the robes to keep the body warm. She blew breath into Ein's mouth and ears, and kept her own ear to his chest, listening to the silence where Ein's heart had beat. She was waiting, and she knew how. Ein's spirit crept into the ice block where the Oono spirit was hiding. There Ein saw Oono's spirit curled like a worm, muttering, "First I was, then I was not. I formed like the ice from the sky. First there was black sky, then water sky, milk sky, then Oono spread over ice white as ice. The wind blows snow on our faces forever. I am tired. I do not want to be eaten by tooth dogs. I do not want to be eaten by ignook. But I do not want to live forever. I want to melt into snow." Seal and fish, rabbit and walrus, gull and bear, Unai are the only ones whose pictures ignook do not carve. We are the only ones who do not send children into the world. If I can talk, this hunter into carving me on his harpoon shaft. My wife may permit a visit with seeds." How could this be? Ein asked himself. And Mai has never carried a baby to the death place. He grieves for young he has never had. Too bad he can't get close to his wife, but maybe all is well. At least they won't quarrel like my uncle Amni Nuna and his wife Nana, who pierced his heart with a fishbone as he slept. In the center of the ice house, the lamp shuddered as the Oono spirit sighed. Noonie hugged the cold body of Ein tighter. She opened the scar of the belly button and blew her breath inside the body. The hunter sleeps in his wife's arms, but soon he returns to his carving, said Oono. I will watch him. Then I will make a picture of myself on a dart carved from my own tusk. I will smear the dart with my seed. I will shoot it into Enmainalu's womb past the teeth. She will give birth to young, and I will melt into snow and die. You may be large and strong, but you are dumb, said Ein's small yellow spirit to the Oono's great blue one. Shooting a dart into your wife will make children who are too injured to live. You'll have to leave them out on the ice with their noses cut off. Your heart will be so heavy you won't be able to swim or fish. And yes, you'll die, but yearning for your children. There will be no losing yourself in snow. Moaned the spirit of the Oono. What shall I do, hunter? I know it is you. The gull stink does not fool me. I could kill your spirit by staring at it. Your wife would freeze by your still body as the lamp guttered. But I am not going to kill you. I have you at my mercy in the ice block where I know how to get out and you do not. You think you do, but you do not. The hole you made coming in has frozen shut behind you. You are too sleepy to make another one. I have you at my mercy, so I can ask any favor I want, and you have to grant it. Speak, said Ein's spirit, and showed the red spot on the nape of its neck. I am so large, and my eyes so small, I have never seen myself, said the Oono. Again I ask, on the dart you are carving, draw my body with those of the other animals. If this magic worked on a creature as large as you, said I, we ignook would bury more meat than we could eat during all our lifetimes. I would be glad to draw your picture on the shaft of a dart, and my, but I cannot take advantage of your stupidity. Besides, carving your picture would be hard. You're so large I can't see what you look like, even when I can see your body. To understand its shape, I would need to make many journeys, long, dangerous ones far into the ice fields. Only that way could I see the inlets and bays of your body. I would have to make drawings of your many parts on the backs of skins. Who knows how many drawings? How would I keep them straight? If you moved, as you would, while I was drawing, I would become confused. I would have to start over. I might spend my whole life figuring out what your body looked like and still not get it right. Meanwhile, what would Noonie eat? Yes, what would Noonie eat? Mumbled Noonie in her sleep. She had slept with first one of Ein's ears in her mouth, then the other. Sometimes his nose, sometimes one of his fingers or toes had been in her mouth. She did not want any part of his body to be cold when his spirit returned. Even if I learned how you look, said I, his spirit curling and uncurling in the center of the ice block, how could I draw a body as large as yours on a dart shaft? It would be better to draw your body on the ice with the runner of my sledge. Your spirit self could sit on my shoulder to guide me. Better yet, I could draw your wife's body on the ice. Then you could hop from my shoulder into the womb of the ice wife, carrying your body's seed. Maybe young would be born. What about the toothed dogs? Asked the Oono's spirit. I will draw no teeth, said I. If no teeth, then no dogs. Oono's spirit was so happy it put its feet in its mouth and rolled around inside the ice block. Ein's spirit had spoken truth, having shown the red spot on its neck, yet it had not told Oono all there was to tell. It felt heavy, not like rolling around with its feet in its mouth. My wife cannot keep my body warm too long, said Ein's spirit. I must return. The Oono spirit, too, remembered its body and drilled a hole by turning its worm tail. The Oono spirit crawled from the ice block through this hole, and the human spirit followed. The blue light in the block went out. A sudden dimming woke Noonie. She looked suspiciously at the lamp, but the wick was still glowing in the oil. Then Ein stirred in Noonie's arms. She rubbed his nose with her own and smelled the wind he exhaled. It smelled like seal mother's milk, as if he had slept in his body all night. Noonie was relieved and thumped her chest with the flat of her hand. Even with Oono's spirit whistling guidance, drawing the Oono's wife on the ice was hard. Ein first had to run the sledge far and fast to get up speed. He could not use sledge dogs because the Oono spirit thought they were tooth dogs. Besides, sledge dogs hear words that have not been spoken and repeat them in their sleep at night. Ein could not trust his dogs with the secrets he had kept from the Oono. Sledge dogs lighten a hunter's load. They are company, but this was a pull across the ice Ein had to make by himself. To get up speed without dogs, Ein would have to run fast, breathing very deeply of very cold air. He feared he would freeze his throat or even his lungs, so before he ran the sledge out onto the ice, he heated his throat. He sat cross-legged on the ice just out of sight of his house and spoke to the sun as a friend. He told him about Noonie, how she laughed and showed the strong teeth she used to chew sealskin soft for clothes. He told about Noonie's legs, how she wrapped them around his body. And he told about the little pockets under her eyes where she kept her tears, and about her breasts, which had at their tips all year long the little berries that grow where ice melts from patches of earth in summer, sweet, short summer. Hearing about Noonie, the sun looked for her. When he saw her feeding sledge dogs near the house, he laughed and shone hot on Ein's throat. If Noonie had been lazy or ugly, if her teeth had been bad, her legs weak, the sun might have taken his warmth from Ein even as Ein was praising her. Ein would have died on the ice near his house. Noonie would have found him knotted stiff, with icicles under his nose. As Ein traveled on his sledge, breathing deeply, He was glad to have Sun for a friend. He would rather have traveled by night, when the stars would have guided him over the ice, but he could not. The ignook traveling by night moves slowly, taking small, careful breaths of frozen air. He runs by the sledge to keep his feet from freezing. Ein was going to carve the body of the wife in one long coast, without lowering his feet from the sledge. So Ein was traveling far out onto the ice, where no living creature but the Oono had gone before. And Ein was traveling by day. Long out of sight was his ice house. Long out of sight was Nooni. Ein was alone with Enmai's spirit on his shoulder, and with a light sledge. If he did not carve the wife's body and find his way home quickly, he would starve. Ein traveled far and fast, and the Oono's spirit whistled on his shoulder. For strength, Ein chanted the names of his ancestors. Then he chanted them again and again. When he had not seen a bear for the time it took to chant the names of his ancestors 3 more times, he chanted stories. First he told how the ice came, then how the sun won his wife, the moon, from her father, the sky. He chanted the story of how the bear tricked the seal into teaching him to fish, and he chanted the story of how the fish learned to swim in the shadows under the ice. When Ein had chanted all these stories, he was so far out on the ice, all he could see was white. Even the sky was white, though the sun was high in it. Sun looked sick, and Ein feared Sun would cough and make a storm. Ein had run out onto the ice till he could run no more. Yet he had to carve the Oono wife in one coast, with only Enmai's whistling to guide him. He could not coast, shove with his foot, then coast again. Ein had hoped the Oono would relent, would allow him to push off with his foot now and then, but Enmai had come to believe in the ice wife completely. The blue spirit claimed if the outline of the wife were not continuous, children would be born deformed. Only a powerful hunter could have outlined the wife in just one push. But Ein was powerful. He had large lungs, a strong heart, and muscular legs. Nooni had rubbed his body with fish oil. She had sewn his trousers and parka tight as skin, with the fur facing in. As she had sewn, she had sung, "O wind, be my husband's friend. Ein is his name, a hunter and a carver. I have made his clothes tight, so you will stream around his body like water around fish. You will not get lost in folds, wind, not get lost in folds." Nooni had slipped the fishbone needle into the fur of Ein's parka just beneath his chin, so he could sew his clothes if they tore. As Ein veered and swerved to Enmai's whistle, his runner cut a track which deepened to a chasm below him. He carved the outline of the wife. Then he carved a room inside her, turning tight to leave her body through the door he had carved going in. He leapt from his sledge and lifted it after him. The sun was lower in the sky now, barely visible in thickening whiteness. Ein was wet with sweat. He was afraid he would freeze as it dried to an ice suit. Talking to the Oono spirit, he moved his arms and legs slowly. He dared not push the hood of his parka off his face, though the top of his head was hot. "You see how beautiful I've made your wife?" said Ein. "Your flesh wife is not as beautiful as this one. This wife does not want me any more than Ein Mai Nalu," said the Oono's spirit. Her doors have not reddened, and her toothed dogs do not snore. Ein sighed. It was useless to point out once again he had drawn no teeth, no dogs. How did that fish get up here on the ice? Asked I, pointing away from the ice wife at nothing. What fish? That white one way over there. While the spirit of Oono was looking for fish, Ein pricked his finger with the needle Nooni had stuck in his parka. He smeared blood from the hole in his finger on the doors of the ice wife's body. Then he put the needle in his finger to keep the hole open. He left the end of the needle sticking out like a tooth. I see no fish, said the spirit of Oono. Never mind, said I. Maybe there was none. But look at my hand. I have stretched it into your wife's womb, and she has bitten me. Now her teeth are stuck in my hand. You can see one poking from my finger. Hear the tooth dogs howling like wind. And look at the wife. Her doors are bright red. Nu-na-ha-hoo, nu-na-ha-hoo, sang the spirit of the Oono. Whistling cheerfully, it entered the womb of the ice wife and looked for her unborn children sleeping on her shelves. Ein was whispering to the dead, who can hear noises so soft no one else can hear them. Ein was calling the dead to come from their villages over the edge of the world. Old who have died because you moved too slowly to follow the food and were left behind on the ice. Children who died because your father could not kill enough to feed you. Babies who died because women cannot live close enough to help each other with birth. Come now, all. Harden the walls of this womb so the Oono spirit cannot escape by tunneling through. Hover holding hands so the Oono cannot float from the womb like smoke. Do not let him slip between your legs. I want to bargain with him. He will help us living find food. We will carry his seed to his wife, sending our sledge dogs before us to wag their tails at the tooth dogs. We will leave the Oono's seed on the tongues of the not yet born. The dead blew over the edge of the world and ringed the walls of the ice wife's womb. They were so cold, the ice they were standing on hardened to rock. The Oono's spirit could not tunnel through. The dead spread over the top of the womb a ceiling of fog so cold the Oono's spirit froze upon touching it. The dead became the ice wife's womb, a bag of cold, a mat of hair, a wall of finger and toenail sharper than teeth, pointing at the blush on the nape of the Oono heart spirit's neck. So the spirit of Anmaimai could not get out of the womb. The Oono then called on the sun for help. Sun, you see how I have been tricked. This ignook has ice in the center of his heart to deceive me so. Shine a knife of light to cut it out. Anmaimai called on the sun in vain. Sun had turned his back. He was chewing a lump of fat as he walked across the edge of the world, calling his wife the moon. He wanted to enter her body. He wanted to make a silver blush spread on her fish-green skin. He paid no attention to the Oono's heart spirit. Ein said, Now you're at my mercy, Anmaimai, for only at a word from me will the dead break ranks to free you. It's my turn to speak, and yours to listen. So it is, said the spirit of the Oono, and showed Ein the red spot. Anmaimai, said I, if you would drive fish and seals from beneath the ice for us to catch, then we could live in villages. The wise, older women could help the young wives give birth. The men would carry fewer babies to the death place. If ignook lived in villages, said Einmeinmai, then sooner or later many hunters would band together to track the Oono. Their wives would sew a huge bag to trap my breath. The hunters would put their ears to my body to listen to the current of my blood. They would follow it upstream to my heart. That is not how I wish to die. If you drive the fish and seals from beneath the ice, said I, our bellies will always be full. We will have no hunger for your flesh. We will praise the Oono who has given us food. We will never kill him. Why should I believe you? The Oono spirit replied. You have already tricked me into bringing my seed to this wife. Inside her womb are sleeping shelves of ice. I do not believe you will help me, but I do not want to stay here, ringed by the dead who do not smile. What choice have I but to promise what you ask? It's true you've been led here through trickery, said I, and I have not lied, and I will not lie, and I will keep my promises. Then why not send your spirit out to show the blood spot on his neck? Asked Oono. In this cold place, even in the parka Nuni sewed, my body would die without my spirit, said I. I will show the red spot on my spirit's neck if you will enter my body. How can I enter your body, ignook? I am a male, and you are a male. I have a special door, said I. I am not going through your left nostril, said Oono's spirit. The door is in my finger, said I. The ignook extracted his wife's needle. A tiny bubble of blood glowed to mark the hole. When Ein saw the eyes of the spirit fasten on the bubble, he spoke the word Nigna softly enough for the dead to hear. They dropped each other's hands. They floated up from the walls of the womb, wispy as breath, then vanished. Ein was holding out his finger to the spirit of the Oono. The bead of blood gleamed like an eye. The Oono's spirit sucked itself down to a worm and dove into the hole. Ein sewed it up, then put the needle back in the fur of his parka. He sang, La ha ah una nishi nishi nishi, so the spirit would not be able to drill a hole through his flesh to escape. When the Oono spirit heard the song, it realized it had been tricked. It flew around Ein's body, screeching, Eek, 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 and pounded the walls of his chest. But Ein would not open the hole in his finger. Hoping to escape through Ein's left nostril, even to the black ice beyond the harehouse villages, the spirit tickled Ein's throat so he would sneeze, but Ein swallowed instead, and the spirit fell to the pit of his stomach. At last the spirit, tired of trying to escape, it curled around itself and sang Nu-na-hau. It had never been in a human body before. It felt light as a fish. Its own body was so fat. When Ein's small yellow spirit poked its head out from between two ribs, Enmaimai's spirit thought of staring at it to kill it. But then it remembered that killing Ein's spirit would mean killing Ein's body. There would be no one to widen his left nostril, and the Oono spirit might rot in a rotting body. With a shrug, the big blue spirit showed the red spot on its neck. The yellow spirit did the same. The two spirits called each other brother and agreed to share breathing. They curled around each other and sang Nu-na-ha-oo. They only looked up to make sure Ein's body was finding its way home across the ice. With two heart spirits warming his body and the stars for a guide, Ein pushed the sledge fast through the snow-tossed night. At his house, Nooni embraced him. Ein helped himself to the dried fish he spread before him. "Thank you for your warmth, spirit of Enmaimai," said Ein into the sleeve of his parka. "I could not have returned through the dark without it. Now I will let you out of my body." "I do not want to leave," said the Oono spirit. "I will ride with you. We will hunt seal or even bear on nights so cold your lungs would freeze without me. We will dive beneath the ice to catch fish. There will be plenty for ignook to eat. The ignook can settle in villages, and I will go with you into the womb of your wife. We will both leave seeds in the mouths of your children. They will pass to the world with 2 sets of wisdom." Ein had been helping Nooni thread a needle. When the thread had passed through the eye and Nooni had knotted it, he opened his mouth to speak to the Oono. He did not get a chance to utter a word, though, for Nooni's eyes grew large and her nose quivered. "Your eye teeth are nearly as long as your chin," she shrieked. "You look like an Oono. I have Enmaimai's spirit in my body." "No wonder you have eaten all the fish I dried the last winter." Ein sighed, for he was still very hungry. "I'm afraid that life will be as hard as before," he said. "Enmaimai's spirit will help me hunt and fish, but then eat most of the food. We'll still have to live far from others. We won't have as sight neighbor any older woman to pull the babies from your body. Yet the Oono has promised our children will live." "There are many colors of snow," said the Oono spirit inside Ein. All night long, Ein lay awake. Nooni threw her leg across him, but Enmaimai's spirit whispered to Ein, "She has not painted her doorway red. It will not open, even if the toothed dogs sleep." "Ignook need not wait for the doors to redden," said Ein. "Nooni has no toothed dogs. She's ready when she runs her finger up and down the crack in my buttocks, as she's doing now." The Oono's spirit would not be persuaded to enter Nooni's body, and Ein's spirit did not wish to be inhospitable to a guest. So Ein's spirit stayed with the visitors, curling around it and sadly singing, "Nu-na-ha-oo, nu-na-ha-oo." At first, Nooni was puzzled. She pulled her hair across her eyes and peered at Ein from between the strands. Then she remembered the spirit of the Oono was in her husband's body. She was not sure she wanted Enmaimai's spirit to visit with her husband's. What huge creatures would grow on her sleeping shelves? She worried her belly would become so big she would no longer be able to sleep in the house by Ein. She did not want to sleep outside with the dogs. "You smell like gull fart with the spirit of that huge lummox inside you," she said aloud to Ein. Enmaimai's spirit heard her. "I suppose you think you smell good?" it said. "You smell like dead fish thawing and rotting." These words came from Ein's mouth, Ein, who had never spoken unkindly to Nooni. Nooni's eyes were slits. "Who would want a man who lets a stupid spirit like Enmaimai's tell him what to do? I see I have not known you all these years. Who would want a wife whose words like the tooth dogs crush the spirit?" asked I. "Yes," said Enmaimai. "Who would want a wife with no manners, who lies with her body too close to yours, breathing more than her share of air?" "Not I," said Ein's spirit. "Not I," said Enmaimai's. The two hard spirits curled around each other once again, singing "Nu-na-ha-oo." Ein's body rolled so his back was to his wife. "We'll see about this," said Nooni. She pricked her finger with a needle. She smeared the doors of her body with blood. She lay very still in the dark with her legs apart, while her spirit, her little yellow spirit, sat cross-legged on her forehead and sang. Hundreds of colors of dark in the cave of birth. Who knows their names? Not the unborn, whose eyes are closed, who cannot open their fists. In skins of dark, on shelves of dark, they curl with knees to mouths. Dark at the roots of their hair, dark between their toes, dark behind their ears and beneath their tongues. Who will seed with light their tongues? Who will name the colors of dark and make the children see? Then the two male spirits, proud of their knowledge, walked through the doors to Nooney's body. They lay seeds on the tongue of an unborn child, the first they found. The unborn smiled and wiggled his fingers and toes. 23 months later, Nooney gave birth to a son named Anmuk, who did not die when An pulled him out of her womb. Anmuk had two heart spirits, a blue one and a yellow one. He could carve and swim and talk as soon as he was born. His first words to his parents were, "Let's slip under the ice to fish." He needed no sledge, but slid across the ice on his belly, jiggling his feet to steer. A great hunter even as an infant, he was desired by women despite his fat white body and long, tusk-like eye teeth. He would not marry. However, he would send his spirits disguised as two white dogs, a large and a small one, to join the sledge dogs when ignook wives were feeding them. The little dog would crawl up a wife's trouser leg, and she went in her house and took off her trousers to see what was lumping the leg. The big dog would follow the little one into her womb. In this way, many more fat, white children with long eye teeth were born among the ignook than two-spirited Ein could father with Nooney. As Anmuk grew older, he spent more and more time by himself in his house, carving pictures of animals on the snaggle-toothed combs that tangle the hair of dying ignook so their houses across the ice will have walls no sound can escape. The spirits of the animals he carved visited him and told him what they saw beneath their eyelids when they slept. They told him of the time long before when the spirits of dead animals lived in villages with the spirits of dead people. This was before people had tasted meat. Nor did animals eat each other in those days. Every creature ate ice. So Anmuk claimed the animals had told him. Who knows whether it is true? No one but his mother paid much attention to Anmuk muttering alone in his house. Nooney touched his toes and stroked his ears. "Dear boy," she said, though Anmuk's hair was only less gray than her own. "We did not make the world." Anmuk touched his mother's wrists. He asked her to keep his body warm while he sent his spirits across the ice, disguised as two white dogs. He sent them to the body of Enmainalu, who still lived and breathed on the ice. The white dogs regurgitated meat near the doors of her womb. Her toothed dogs rushed to get the meat. Anmuk's spirits nipped into the womb. This was the first time a child of Enmaimai carried his seed to his wife. "23 months later, Enmainalu gave birth to 12 daughters and 12 sons, each with 2 heart spirits. They looked like Unai, though with round ignook noses and round ignook eyes. Enmainalu howled when she saw them, but she let them drink from her nipples. The blue and yellow spirits of Anmuk watched the children until the ice broke beneath their weight, and they sank into the water to fish. Then the spirits returned to Anmuk's house, where Nuni had been blowing breath into his nostrils. Although his body was warm throughout, he was weak and could hardly eat. He lay with his head on his mother's lap, sipping fish broth. When he tried to talk, he barked, but his parents knew. Anmuk no longer wanted to live, so Ein widened his son's left nostril. The yellow spirit of Anmuk went to the villages of Ignook dead. The blue one went to the black ice, where the Oono dead live far apart. Ein fished and carved long after Anmuk had died, but finally his time came. He walked to the death place and stuck his knife up his left nostril. His Oono spirit returned to Enmaimai's body, which had been sleeping on the ice all along. The big blue heart spirit lived another long life there. Then, the time having come for Enmaimai to die, he leaned on one of his tusks till it broke. He rubbed his nose against it to widen his left nostril. His body melted at once into snow. When Enmainalu died, the sun came for her. He called the toothed dogs by name and stabbed the heart of each with an icicle of light. Lifting in his arms Enmainalu's enormous body with the heart spirit still inside, he carried her way beyond the black ice to hide her in a cave in the darker than dark. When the body of his moon wife dwindles, he visits Enmainalu's cave. Some say Enmainalu grows stars on her sleeping shelves, even though she is dead. But how could that be? To this day, no ignook will harm an Oono. No Oono will injure an ignook. The Unai have round noses and eyes. The ignook have long eye teeth. These are pulled from the mouths of the dead before the bodies are taken out on the ice. Hunters carve weapons from the ivory of the teeth. It is also carved into finger rings, which no one will wear, though many ignook carry them in pouches around their necks. They claim words issue from the pouch mouths. La ha ha hu na nishi 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 nigna nigna and nuna ha u. Like the hope of the dead for the living, these words spread around the ignook to keep them warm if they are stranded far and alone on the ice at night. There you have it. Wasn't that amazing? How the story so fully creates a cultural cosmos unto itself, like a National Geographic of the surreal and the fantastic. A story dictated by its own logic, like all cultures are, and yet there are so many universal truths we can relate to. the loss of a child, the fear of death in general, and the yearning for a thriving family unit. I want to thank Patricia for allowing me to read this story, and I encourage you to seek out my interview with her on the Collidescope.com. You can also find my review of her first novel, The Marvelous Adventures of Pierre Baptiste. That's only the tip of the iceberg, no pun intended, because you'll find all kinds of literary content on the site, from reviews of innovative fiction to poetry and stories from the most intriguing writers working today. If you'd like early access to content like this and other awesome benefits, such as monthly book picks or editorial services, then consider supporting the Kaleidoscope's efforts through patreon.com/the Kaleidoscope. There's always more content in the works, so stay tuned, and thanks so much for your support. Together, we can make the unheard heard.